Welcome to the sixth episode of our podcast of the third season. Today we're going to talk about the state of poverty in America. We're going to discuss specifically how the government has affected poverty and what the implications of new technology and like the overtake of automation are, and what those implications will have on poor people. We're inspired to do this by our English project and our recent topic, which was about poverty in America. So the first question is like, why is the state of people that are like the poverty cycle? Why does the state of the poor remain the same? Right, like uh, over the past 100 years, there's been tons of movements for a bunch of oppressed groups or a bunch of suppressed groups, and they have not always had good outcomes, but there's been a lot of good movements. There's been a lot of tried programs, but why are the state of poverty remained fairly similar?
Yeah, so the one I had like two ideas as to why that's true. Like the first thing, and I don't know if this is true, I'm just like throwing it out there. I think that it's kind of like a status thing, right? Like in order to have like a successful movement, I guess you need prominent figures, right? You need people who can I guess become faces of movement, right? And those people kind of need to be somewhat well known to begin with, and they need to have like I guess a lot of knowledge and a lot of I guess status to really like bring forth the movement. And I think that's just like pretty hard for uh like obviously poor people to do because they don't have status. That's the entire like premise, right? So I think it's very hard for them to like elevate based on that or in like start a movement. That's like one idea I had. But if anyone has like any thoughts on that or as to why I guess it's been this bad, but other groups have seen improvements.
Um, well, I think I announced this before, but like other groups have like a lot of voices because like here's the thing: if you ask a random person on the street, like what are the three biggest issues in the world today, like I don't think you'd be surprised at how many people would not say poverty because it just slips their mind. It's not a high profile issue, right? So I mean, it is a high profile issue, but it's like stupidly like overlooked basically in society, even though they're probably suffering one of the most in like entire world because if you saw how much people are in poverty around the world, it's just like shocking compared to like other movements. Not saying those other movements are not important, but like they should be weighed like on the same level, considering how many people go through poverty and how overlooked they are.
Yeah,
And
I
on
think
some
the
level,
fact that
go ahead, Sajeev.
I think the fact that it was like a non-changing problem, like over the past like how many ever decades, the like if you look at like a poverty versus time children poverty versus time graph, it's like fairly flat. So I think just year after year, it's like us, like we'll talk about it and we'll know we want to do something about it, but then nothing really comes out of that. So I think it's just like a constant problem that we've learned to live with.
That's interesting. I was actually going to say something kind of different. I think that our definition of poverty and what poverty is exactly has changed over the last 100 years. I think if you compare someone in the 1930s, when people were in the middle of the Great Depression, dying on the streets, starving, that is very different than what we consider poverty today in the US. And like Aditya said, poverty in like India or China or somewhere that's very rural is very different than what we consider poverty. So it's hard to say that an issue has not changed when our very definition of what that means just keeps changing with every generation, every decade almost.
Yeah, so like one thing I was thinking about that is like one reason I was thinking that like why poverty, I guess like people don't really care is it just like a way of society? Is it just something that's like inevitable to exist in our societies? And maybe this is like maybe like tracking too far, but I'm just thinking that like as us as like people, we just ignore it because we just think that oh, it's like part of society. It's gonna happen. There's gonna be people who are rich. There's gonna be people who are poor. And obviously, we're just talking about the standard of living increasing, right? Poverty back in the day is much worse than now. But at the end of the day, poverty still exists, right? And so, do you guys think that it's just like one of those things that exists in our society and there's nothing you can do about it? But I think I'm not sure if that's true because I think there's a lot of other things, such as maybe 150 years ago, people would say, "Oh, racism is a part of our society. It's just the way human nature is." But now we obviously disagree with that. So I'm wondering if you guys think this is the case.
think poverty is viewed in a very relative context. Whenever there's a society of any kind, you're always going to have people who are doing better, people who are doing worse, and the people who are doing worse are always going to be called poverty. Like the people who are in poverty today, not to demean their situation by any means, but their situation would not have been as extreme back again like 100 years ago, but we still call them poverty today because I think the gap has narrowed, and in terms of relatively how much we consider poverty as today, they are just as worse off.
Brad,
What would you
going
say
on.
like it is like a way to measure that the fact that like do we actually know if quality of living for poor people has gone up? Like is that a fact?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would definitely. I think the quality of
I'm-
living for society is in like we can evidently see it's increased. But
Yeah, I mean,
What
like
is
people
that?
aren't dying.
What is the
People aren't dying of
evidence?
polio anymore. That's
No,
just one example.
no, but
Yeah, so
no,
relatively it has increased.
right.
but-
I think what Sajid is saying is that he's saying that the top society has had a much higher rate of increase in terms of
Yeah,
their
I think it's just
Right.
not, yeah.
sure, and that's kind of
because society in general is always going to go through a progression of betterness, but like it's just a rate
Right.
of what you're gonna like get better. But I was also thinking like the reason why people don't have sympathy for people in poverty is because like what is America? America is like a meritocracy, and on a surface level, like anyone can do anything, but like if you look further than that, it's not that simple, and people just can't look past surface level thinking, oh, they're not being like segregated, they're not being discriminated against, they have the same opportunity as us. Why are they not doing well? That's like the first thought when they think about why poverty is not like a huge issue in their eyes.
Building off that, do you think maybe a problem is that when we hear these kind of stories, right, of people emerging from poverty and making a name for themselves or doing something with their lives that is seen as remarkable, do you think that people get too absorbed into those stories and kind of push away the rest of the poverty kind of stories, like, you know, the regular kind of life in poverty where people struggle to make it out?
I think that's what a lot of elites would think. They would think that, oh, you know, like one of them did it, so it's like their fault that they're stuck in poverty, right? And like you'll hear the sentiment from a lot from like I guess very rich people and people who want to protect their
I don't
name.
think you can.
And that's not
just
only-
like rich people. It's
Sure, just people in general. You're right.
That's not only applicable to poor movements as well. You see that a lot for the gender equality movement, racism, basically in every movement.
See for everything.
One thing I'm wondering is that I think one thing the reason I think other movements such as like the Black Lives Matter movement, the reason they have so much traction is because there's really big events that are like broadcasted, right? And it's like such big like tragedies, right? And I think part of it is that like you don't see these huge events, right? Such as like the George Floyd thing, right? You don't see that very often, right? So when it happens, it kind of creates like a national like I guess outcry, right? But with poverty, right, you're not seeing like huge events, right? It's just like an ongoing thing that it's bad, but it's just that like it happens every day and people just get over it, right? Like you're not seeing a police killing every single day, but you are seeing people starving and getting like, you know, ignored by you know, even when we went to San Francisco, we saw a lot of homeless people and it was like obviously really bad, but we didn't think much about it after. But if we saw like, you know, a police pulling over a Black person, we'd still talk about it probably like 2 weeks later, right? So that's just like one reason I think that like the poor people haven't like been able to create a movement, because I think to create a movement you need something to build it off, right? You need big events, especially last year, like the George Floyd thing kind of like re-sparked the BLM movement. And I don't know too much about other movements, but I'm sure there was like big events, right, that really created big deals.
You're right. Like we saw that, I think, with the Me Too movement as well, right? Like these movements, you've seen these kind of big things, but poverty is like it's a trend. It's something that's been there for a while, and it's something that you can't really define by one event. It's something that happens over the course of time, right? Like when you check charts, it happens over the course of a year, and there's minimal change. That's how we define poverty in a way. But when you see these other events, right, the brutality that you see the events, especially with the George Floyd death, right? You saw the brutality that came out of that, and people were alarmed because sure, it's been a problem, but finally it's been visualized in front of them. And it is hard. You're right. It is hard to kind of put that into a visual and give awareness to a bunch of people to make it an actual problem that people can try and solve.
Yeah,
Shaq's definitely right. So I think
there you
what
go.
he said about being defined is completely accurate because Paul, being the poor movement has no definition. It's probably, I'd say, the most widespread thing in America because, okay, we have a fundamental problem. People are poor, right? So how are you supposed to fight back against that when the cause is in every facet of society? So racism, the gender wage gap, generational wealth. You could pick literally any problem, and you see that poor, being poor is tied into every single one of those. Where do you start? And that question overwhelms people, and so there's never any traction to become a movement because you're not narrowing in on this is how we're going to stop it.
And I think another thing is that they're all on different pages, right? There's so many poor people, right? So it's hard for them to get on the same page and be like, okay, we want this type of welfare, we want this type of program, right? But for like, I guess like a BLM movement, it's much simpler to target a problem and everyone get on the same page about how do we solve that, right? As in like, okay, here's police brutality. Okay, that is a problem we're going to address. Here's how we do it, right? And everyone is kind of on the same page. But with poverty, there's so many different ways to approach it. And there's so many causes for certain people in different areas for feeling it, right? So everyone's on different pages, right? So like poverty here in California is much different than poverty in like a rural Midwestern state, right? So those people are never going to be on the same page about what they want and what they need, which I think is another reason which prevents like a mass scale movement.
Yeah, so I think
also,
in general.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think in general that poverty is just less defined than like another social movement. Like poverty, like with the social movement like Black Lives Matter, there's very clear victim and there's very clear oppressor. The victims are Black people, obviously, but then the oppressor is like clearly like racist people, racist cops like Derek Chauvin. But with the poverty movement, sure, there's a oppressed, right? There's people in poverty, but who is oppressor? Who are you gonna fight against? Who are you gonna like face the movement against? There's no like clear person. Like the rich people, like sure, they might not be have the best interest of the poor people, but they're not actively doing something against them. So it's like
you can blame
who are you blaming? So
exactly right, yeah.
And also one thing, like I wanted to bring something up, which I don't know if it's entirely true, but what I see, right? So we see a lot of like current day people, right? Like one example I have is, of course, basketball star LeBron James. He started his own school. The I Promise School helps children in poverty. But one thing that you see a lot of these like movements focusing is the younger generation, right? Do you think that's a problem that they're focusing strictly on the younger generation rather than trying to help the like poverty in general, like of all ages? Because isn't that like, while it might be better in the situation for some, isn't it not better in the situation for a group? Like at least
we have Shaq, we have that written down somewhere, so we'll get to it in a little bit.
We'll get back to it later.
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's any other thoughts on like movements as a whole, we can go now, or we can just kind of move on to the next idea.
Yeah, we should move on.
Okay, nice. So the next thing I wanted to address was, so in terms of addressing the problem now that we like kind of discussed why isn't there bigger groups, right? The next thing would be how do we kind of target this, right? So one big problem is income inequality, right? So I'm wondering, to reduce income inequality, do we look at uplifting the poor specifically, right? Creating welfare programs, targeted programs to help them, or do you think it's like a better approach to target the rich people and bring them down? I wouldn't say down, but level the playing field in a sense, right? So if we have two scales, do we move up or do we move this down, or do we do some sort of combination of both? And I think right now in our society, we're doing a combination of both. But as we know, right, from doing our project, it's become worse. Income inequality has become much worse. And I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas about, and this just might get into a whole like debate about like socialism and shit like that, but that off the top, what do you guys think would be like a better approach?
Wait, what's your question? Because obviously you would ask everyone you would ask would say uplifting the poor. The question is that feasible? Why would you not uplift the poor? Wouldn't that be? Why would you?
No. He's asking if you want to uplift the poor, like or bring down.
Yeah,
the
like basically, do we like spend a lot of money on welfare programs, or do we prevent big companies from getting bigger? Like, what is a more effective approach?
Okay,
I would say uplift the poor, because I feel like as a society, we've done regulation and we've also let the free market play out. And I think that we've never fully committed to only uplifting the poor. Like we got to do more of that, because we haven't seen the results of that. And I feel like by bringing down the rich, you're not really directly helping the poor. There's no direct benefits one of them. It could be split between like the money could even go back to the rich in other means. But like if you directly target the poor and give them more like feasible programs, then I think that'd be the best. I've heard from many people that like bringing down the rich is never the answer because it hasn't worked in the past, and I just don't think stuff gonna work in the future.
I partially agree and disagree with what he said, because I agree that we shouldn't bring down the rich, because bringing down the rich, like Mike said, it's not direct. It's indirect. That money could go elsewhere. It could go to the middle class. It could go to other problems. But the problem is, we've seen welfare programs and all these kind of governmental programs that try and help the poor just absolutely flunk. Like, it's not like it hasn't happened before, right? We saw Bill Clinton's 96, I forget its name, but it was the 96 welfare program where it was, I think it's TAMP, to help needy families. And that thing just went absolutely nowhere. There was no funding for it. So we can say that funding is going to be there for these welfare programs. We can try and divert money to it. But the problem is that there can't just be funding. There needs to be a constant budget that like continues to adapt every single year, rather than having kind of something that's there for 1 year and then just stops, because that's what's happened in our past.
Yeah, but Shaq, think about it. Like those guys, like back in the day, Bill Clinton, though he made 10th and he put some money there, like he restricted eligibility so much, and like he actually like decreased access for a lot of people. Like that doesn't represent like what actually like a government would do if they completely allocated resources to the poor. Because he also like hiked the taxes, right? He hiked taxes for the rich, so he did a combination of both. So it didn't work.
Is that realistic? Like, is that realistic? Like, I know we're bringing that up, but it's not like it'll just be fully like, it's not like, oh, we're going to completely shut down and just uplift the poor, right? It's not like that's going to happen.
No, but in 1996, he decreased access to it.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, look at the past 100 years, right? We saw the charts when we were doing our project. It's not like when we tried to implement these welfare programs, they've worked in the past. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going to work now, right? Because I know we're saying we want to uplift the poor. That's been the focus of this country for a good amount of time, right? Like, at least that's what their goal in the media and in the public has been. But is that actually going to happen, even if we try and set that as a goal? Like, I understand that that's the best way because it's the most direct approach and you're actually affecting the poor. But how effective will it be? I don't know. That's why I'm not a huge fan of that kind of proposition.
Right. So there's like, I think there's like two things that come out of it. One is that if you directly target the poor, at the end of the day, this even if the rich like get much richer, the standard of living overall increases, which it's debatable if that's actually better than the outcome of an increased gap, right? Because like, yes, the standard of living might get better, but if there's a bigger gap, it actually traps people who are poor further into the lowest class of society, right? Which is obviously not good. And then the second benefit is that you're making everyone happy, right? You're like, oh, the rich aren't mad because they're not getting like targeted. The poor are happy because they're being targeted. But I think one thing that is dangerous is that if you like focus entirely on, oh, let's pump money into the poor, right? The rich basically need the poor to run their corporations, their businesses, right? The poor run America, right? So I think if you let the rich kind of run with it and just get far ahead, at the end of the day, they're the ones that know how to play, economics well. They know how to run businesses. They know how to multiply their money much faster than the poor, which means that this gap increases, right? And I think the gap is probably the worst thing, because aside from being like a driving factor of inequality, it creates even more like tension in society, right? It isolates everyone more from each other, right? So even if we're like going upwards, right? This is going at that point, the cap is going to increase much higher. And I don't know if we want that gap. I don't even know if that increase in standard of living is better than this increase in the gap that we might get.
Oh, well, the idea is to have something to close the gap, right? I mean,
Right, no, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that if you focus, let's say, entirely on helping the poor, because right now we're kind of in the middle. So we're seeing do extremist ideas work, right? And you focus entirely on uplifting the poor, I think you let the rich run rampant and it gets worse. But I think if you go the other way, I think it's even less effective because the rich have a lot of power, right? So they can kind of push back on a lot of stuff, and they can always they're very obviously they know ways to get around taxes and around loopholes. They've been doing it for decades now. So um that's just like my concern on that. But yeah, if anyone has any other ideas, we can drop them now.
So it seems like we don't have a solution at all.
I guess we don't. We're not policymakers, I guess. So that's just I guess we just
I mean we're understanding why it hasn't been solved. I guess
right.
like it's extremely hard. But like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna be able to solve it.
Yeah, that's just that.
But
But
we don't even have a thought. We don't have a thought on what we even start with because all solutions don't work.
I think if you go small scale, it works. I don't think like honestly like why is it the government's job to solve this? I think it should just be people, right? Like if you go and each of us.
Oh well, the concern. Oh, here the concern is very simply that
there's like mentorship programs. Those direct things seem to work. Like those work. That's the only thing that's like really worked.
No, but the problem is that the poor can't do it themselves. That's why they're poor in the first place. They don't know how to.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like there are like if you set up a program that's made of like when we all grow older, we know that we want to directly go into these communities and directly help.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that does make a change because that's basically.
But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. Maybe we're just good-hearted people, but a lot of people aren't like that.
I mean, I'm sure a good amount of people here want to do that.
Sure, but I mean, at the end of the day,
the government should focus on making it easier for us to do that. Maybe that would work, right? Maybe it won't.
We're overestimating the American population.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that most people are like oh
See,
yeah,
people
I'm gonna donate my
also
money.
like we're also
and maybe
extremely different.
I think if you got people on a podcast, they'd be like, yeah, I want to help with the poor. But I think in the back of their heads, like I'd rather buy another car.
I mean, like, and the other thing.
And also, like let's keep in
different.
mind that we're immigrants. Like we're immigrants. We came from, or not we, but our parents came from that kind of situation. So
we have a different
might be that we're more inclined.
Yeah, and we're not like hyper rich to like the point where we can.
I mean, we are the people we're talking about.
We are the 9.9%.
Sure. Yeah.
I read a article the other day that just talked about how America is just unique among world cultures because we just directly think that anything that uplifts another group will directly diminish our own quality of life, and do that like we treat that as normal. We're like, okay, the poor get a welfare program. That means my taxes go up, this goes up, whatever, right?
I don't think that's a poor way of thinking because the burden of someone's existence always lies on some group of people, right? Like your existence, someone has to pay for it.
How much does it? How much will it directly affect you? The effect on you personally will be marginal, for the most part.
Sure, but it's not about. I mean,
okay, sure, but that way of thinking is why we're in the situation in the first place. Like that. That's a fact.
Connect. What do you mean?
The reason all these policies never work out, they always stall out in the government or when.
I don't think if we fatten taxes and just like straight up fed money into like.
No, another question I had. So let's talk about like specifically like welfare, right? So, we did a lot of research on this, and in you guys' opinion, based on what you guys know, how well do you guys think welfare programs function, right? So many programs have incentives that actually discourage people from like seeking opportunities, right? Because of benefits from staying unemployed, right? And stuff like that. So, like, if you guys know, what are some other ways that the government holds back the poor, and like, how can we create systems that, and maybe we don't know, right? But if any ideas as to how to create systems that are encouraging for people to get off welfare, right, and to kind of work upwards as opposed to encouraging them to stay on welfare, right? And we obviously are going to assume that all poor people want to work, and because that's the majority of it, like almost 99% of them are interested in making their own situations better and will put in the work to do so, right? We always hear the stories about people working 2 jobs and all this stuff, right? So I think they would love to be improved. It's just a system of It's just like a numbers game, right? So yeah, if you guys have any thoughts on one, what are your opinions on these systems that trap people, and two, how do we create systems that encourage people to move upwards as well?
I have a question. Are you making the assumption that most, if not all, welfare programs are designed to trap people? Because what you just said.
No, I'm not. So I'm saying that there are some, and I'm wondering if you guys during our research know of any that are actually like encouraging to get off welfare, and two, if you guys don't know any ideas off the top of your head that like of like a good ways to incentivize people to get off welfare. That's like obviously aren't like just brutal. Be like, yo, you have 5 years. If you can't improve, you're done. Right. I think that actually exists. Like there's like limited 10 years on welfare. I believe some programs have like in some states have limited tenure. Like you can only be on this for 5 years, and if you don't get off it, you're screwed. Right. So it puts the pressure on people, which is obviously not good, right?
I believe that exists with food stamps as well. Well, I'm not totally sure on that.
Like homeless shelters.
Yeah, well, I think homeless shelters have like limits on like, okay, you gotta get out eventually, right? So
I just have a question for a second. So when you're homeless, right, and you're living in a homeless shelter temporarily, and you go apply for a job, is your homeless shelter your address that you put down?
Oh, I've heard about this. This is actually this is actually a big problem, because what happens is when you go to fill out a job application, they literally turn you down because you don't have an address, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm wondering. So
right,
because of that, do homeless shelters give you an address?
I know, you're just screwed. You have to put the parking lot that you stay in, or you put your last home. Like if you like,
put the no way you put the parking lot.
No,
the parking lots don't have an address. I mean, like
no, they put like
isn't the homeless shelter in a tent like in front of a building or something?
No, I've heard. Okay, like if you live in a tent under a thing, I've heard people put like the street address, the street of the highway or whatever, right? So, and I think a lot of people put their last house they lived in, even though they don't stay in it anymore, right? So if they were in an apartment, they put that one. And but then like it's like the workers know, right? Like the employers know, and they just turn them down because it's like, all right, we can't have you. But yeah, I don't know. Like what I'm thinking is like, I was wondering if you do like some sort of incentivized taxation, right? Where it's like, if you're under like the poverty line, right? The more like the more you have, the more money you make, the more benefits you make. But that sounds counterintuitive, because why would you help people who already have more money, right? But if you think about it that way, right, they're like, okay, boom, if I make more money, the government's actually going to give me more money. So let me figure out ways to do it, right? But that does sound counterintuitive, because you have a limited amount of money, and that means the people who need it the most are not getting it. That's just like what came to my head. But like I don't know.
I think definitely, like going back to the job thing, there needs to be ways, because one thing companies can be, I mean, not even companies, but just like regular places, more incentivized to get younger workers, get workers for cheaper, right? But if you can get a younger worker and a worker for cheap, because people who are young like to work, and of course they appeal a lot more to customers.
Also, it's like we're not going to complain about like raises. Like if they hire a 16-year-old at Starbucks, like that kid is not going to complain about like, oh, I want a raise, or they're not going to,
exactly. They're
Yeah.
there just to do their job, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a summer job. So, and it's just like, yeah, I don't know. Like welfare just seems kind of like a screwed system to me, because, like we talked about UBI, but like this is a debate topic, but I think UBI makes sense, because if it's guaranteed money, right, then people are like, okay, if I work, I'm not going to lose this money no matter what, right? So they're always incentivized to
I don't see how that money doesn't become worthless.
Oh, in the UBI system?
Yeah, I don't see how that money has any value. All price of all goods is just going to go up.
Right. Okay. Well, the concept is that it's not brand new money, right? It's money that comes in through taxes, and that means you're
upping taxes on the rich.
Yeah, to pay for it. Right. But the rich, if you think about it this way, right? It's technically on net, the rich are going to be worse off, because while they're getting $1,000, they're getting taxed like way more.
Of course.
So that's the concept. But like
you're trying to mask that whole thing.
Right. You're trying to like kind of hide it from people to think that like, okay, here, I'm giving you money. Like, don't be mad. But yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of what I think. I just think that like this is kind of like a tough situation, because like the ways for the government to help poor people. Like, okay, so one thing I've heard is that like job requirements sound interesting, right? They sound like, oh, like you only get welfare if you have a job, which makes sense. It's similar to like if you make more money, you get more benefits. It's, hey, if you're working, you're actively working to get off welfare, you are going to get rewarded. But the other side is that getting a job is just very hard, right? As we just like went over, right? You can have disabilities, which makes it hard to get a job. You might not have, like, you don't have an address, which means that getting it, like, no one's gonna hire you. You can't pass an interview because you literally don't have clean clothes, or you don't have the basic education to pass an interview, right? So those are problems. But I mean, like, if anyone else has any thoughts on welfare, if not, we can kind of just move.
Well, I guess you can you can increase unemployment benefits, because if you leave the workforce, you don't get any. But if you
Yeah, but then you get the COVID situation where a bunch of people just chilling
right.
unemployed.
Yeah, because what happens is that
Like,
if you have
literally during
unemployment,
COVID, people wanted to be unemployed.
right? So what happens is that
not all people, of course.
right, but like what happens is some people who get a lot of benefits from unemployment are like, yo, if I get a job, I'm literally gonna make less on net.
that's what I'm
Right.
saying, yeah.
You're right.
So that's a problem.
So you
Yeah.
want to make contingencies in some sort of plan like that, right? Like, make sure that they're an active member in the workforce in order to get it. But then you also need to, like, it is a complicated plan because you need to make sure that they have
It's very
access
hard
to
to
jobs.
enforce all of this.
Yeah, because you need to make sure that they have access to jobs. And of course, when you enforce that from a federal standpoint, you also have to cooperate with states to make sure that type of thing works. And then after that only can you actually like implement this kind of payment system where if you're unemployed but still looking for a job, you can get you can get benefits or whatever.
Does anyone remember what Roosevelt did in the 1930s during the Depression?
No, bro, we failed that test. But no, I don't. But I think what happened is to get to the Great Depression, basically they just like made fake jobs.
Exactly,
like-
that's what I'm talking about.
right.
Like, for example, one person would plow, like
Right,
dig out
yeah.
a field, another person would put it back in.
Right, exactly.
And-
Wait, just low key, that is just very smart. Like, I don't know.
It sounds so stupid, but
It
It
sounds
sounds
stupid,
stupid,
but
but
it's
it gives them
very,
the
very
opportunity.
good.
The biggest thing is that, I mean, one of the biggest things is that people complain about, not even in the poor, but in middle class or whatever, is that no, we don't have job experience. Every job is just so.
No, but what I'm wondering is who's paying people to like dig up holes and then fill them up.
That's what I was wondering. I'm not
That's what I'm wondering.
economics,
Because
so I couldn't understand that.
It
But
doesn't for a job to have value, doesn't someone have to demand it? Right.
yeah, I don't know. I never.
So
got
I'm
that.
wondering how
But
digging up a
government
hole.
can
works.
basically
But
create
this
fake
plan
land.
did happen during the Depression. So.
Steve, what were you saying?
Think about it this way: does anybody demand a bridge? Did anybody really demand the Golden Gate Bridge? It was desired for sure, but nobody was like, "Hey, I'm going to put up a few."
Okay, even if it's desired, who's desiring like, yo, dig up this
Infrastructure
hole?
projects just happen because government can spend and will spend.
No, sure. But like, okay, even if they build like a new road, right? There's still benefits because people want that. People are like, okay, this is beneficial. But I'm wondering like how digging up a hole and closing it is like how anyone would be like, okay, I'm gonna like put some money.
I'm just
into
wondering
this.
where.
Maybe there's something
like
more
literally,
to it.
where does
I
the
don't
money
know.
come from?
Yeah, maybe we're not getting it. We probably aren't. There's
Yeah.
we're
Like,
not-
maybe
but
there's
it
something
clearly
to do
worked.
with opening
It
it up.
worked in a time where there just wasn't money because of the
Right,
Depression.
yeah.
So
No, but basically, see, I think the way I understand economics is that, and Sujeev, tell me if I'm
I don't
wrong,
understand
but
economics.
I think it's that like money doesn't technically like leave, right? Money always exists. It's just that if people hold on to it, then it's not. Then that's when the economy goes down. So technically, people can always just spend their money, right? So it's like the way that like recessions happen is when people hold on to money and aren't spending it anymore, right?
Yeah,
So
there's no
technically,
flow. It's all about
yeah,
flow.
exactly. So technically, that money still exists, and all it takes is you to incentivize people to put that money back in, right? So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
wondering
that's
how,
basically what the stock market is, right?
right? So I'm wondering how digging up a hole incentivizes people to put money back into the economy, right? Who's
That's
paying for
very
that
simple.
job?
It puts cash in the hands of ordinary people.
But where's that cash coming from?
That's all just tax reserves that the government has sitting around. Think about it this way: the way you're increasing flows, you're now saying, "Hey, you workers that had no job before, here's some money. Now go spend it. To go get some food from the market. They're going to get food." That
So it's
market owner's
basically-
gonna
it's basically
pay their
like a-
employees. Those employees are going to go do their laundry.
So it's basically it's like a transfer payment. It's like welfare. It's just like giving them money. but now you're just making them dig up a hole for nothing.
I'm not familiar with this digging up a hole.
Oh,
No,
okay.
but I think it's just to get people working, just like
I see.
reinvigorate.
What is the digging up a hole thing?
So basically,
Okay.
it's just that like, or Mike, do you want to explain it?
Sure. So Roosevelt like implemented like public work programs, right? Where he wanted to get people to start working so he could stimulate the economy. But the problem was he wasn't really creating substantial jobs. Like he wasn't always creating bridges. He was sometimes making people like half-baked jobs. Like, oh, this guy, okay, you go dig up this hole and then you get paid, okay? And this other guy go fill that hole back in and then you get paid.
Yeah,
It's
so
like
that's just like a productless economy, right?
Right, yeah.
A lot of things are productless, right? No goods are produced.
But that's not
in
even a
transaction.
service. It's not even a service. Like, no one is better. Like, a haircut is not a product, but it's a service.
Sure, I mean, services will always exist. Those have to. But the point is, like, there's your GDP may not be going up because you're not producing anything in theory, but because of the way it's measured, it looks like your economic activity is going up. So it just makes you look more prosperous.
But I think for what was I gonna say? So basically, I think that this welfare won't work. I think that you have to, instead of doing this digging up and filling up bullshit, I think you have to like actually force people to start doing jobs. Like give them jobs in their hands, and give them a training program in their hands. And then if they don't do it, like you don't get any benefits. But if you do it, like you get some money, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how different that is from like a regular infrastructure project, besides the training part.
I mean, you got to train them, or else you'll be stuck in.
Yeah. So my point is, like, are we just gonna have a bunch of infrastructure projects?
Yeah, I think that works. I think that works better than what we have right now.
Okay.
All right. So I guess the next thing, and this will kind of transition into like tech and I guess education. But I'm wondering, so like right now we have a lot of volunteering and service programs, right? But those are like temporary solutions, right? So what is like a good balance, and what is a good way to help people in the short term, but also like set them up for success in the long run, right? Because obviously a homeless shelter is great, but it is only temporary, right? So you help them for a few months and then what, right? How do we get people back on their feet? And like we can kind of transition into how like I guess new tech is kind of creating that situation. But in general, right, like volunteering and services is great, but you know, like how can a homeless shelter kind of help set people up in the long run? You know what I mean?
I don't think it's the homeless shelter necessarily that is setting
Sure,
people up
sure.
in the long run, right? But yeah,
But-
I get your point. We have a short term kind of, it's not necessarily a solution, but like a short term kind of stopgap thing.
Mhm.
I think what we've been talking about, right? Government intervention, something like that. We need something substantial and something that is kind of set in stone rather than this kind of floating gray area in order for something to actually happen. And it has to come from up top, because if, like, you know, the problem is poor people right now, like we said earlier, right? Nobody is there to stand up for them, because when you're poor, it's you for yourself, you and your family, right? You have to support for your family. It's not like one person can take a stand for everybody, because people need to unite for that to happen. And they're, in that regard, they're sacrificing their lives, right? You're spending weeks trying to plan something. Guess what? That's weeks away from money. So, but like there needs to be some sort of intervention, and it has to be set in stone, official type of thing for that to happen.
I think the biggest thing is if we have them there for a few months, we have control over helping them out, then this ties a little bit into the next question, but education is just paramount. I think a lot of homeless shelters are already, and places in general, are already focusing on this. But the point is that the biggest advantage that the rich have over the poor is their education. I
Right,
think
knowledge.
If you dropped a rich person into a poor situation with what they had then, they would be rich again in like a year,
Exactly. Yeah.
because
And
they
see, so
already
on a
have
side note,
necessity.
that's what the American dream is.
Exactly.
That's what like the American dream concept is that if you put someone in the bottom, they can get up if they know what they're doing. But the
Exactly,
problem is,
no one knows what they're
yeah,
doing.
no one knows what they're doing, and no one's teaching them.
Exactly. So if you have the opportunity to have them there for a few months to have access to what they know, then improving that is the best way to help them in the long run.
But like, and this is kind of like getting to the next few questions. But like, teaching financial literacy is something that like the rich don't want to teach people. It's something
Exactly.
exclusive. You know what I mean? It's like they want to keep it to themselves. Like,
I don't think that's
like
true. I don't think that's true.
you don't buy that.
I don't think that's true. I just
Because
think
okay, maybe the way the reason I think that is like the only time I see people like, here's how you get rich. It's some clickbait bullshit of like do stocks and like buy Dogecoin
sure,
or some
that's what you're
bullshit.
seeing because that's what people have. That's what people want to market. They want to
Right,
market their
right.
course, right?
So I'm wondering is like where like which rich people are teaching like on a large scale like financial literacy to people who
It
need
doesn't.
it.
It doesn't. I don't think you have to say rich people have to be teaching it because
People who know,
people who know, right? And that can be. You don't have to be rich to know. You just have to be educated. I think there's a lot of programs like that exist. More coming up now, but there are a lot of programs like that.
Yeah, I don't really I agree with you, Jeff. I don't really think the rich are preying on the poor like that. Like I don't think they really have it in for them like that. Like it's just
Sure,
it's
right.
not a conscious thing. It's a subconscious thing. Like they won't shoot. They won't. Obviously, if they had a choice, I think a lot of people would just choose to let them have financial literacy. I don't think that's so.
But
Yeah, I don't think they're hiding any secrets. Like I don't think that's how it works. Of course, like they're not fully transparent about everything, but
So do you think most rich people would be like, all right, here's how I did it. Here's how I did it. And they would just
I
tell
think
like a lot of people, really?
I mean, I think a lot of people.
Because I don't know.
get
I don't
rich in
know if
dirty
that's
ways
true.
as well.
the thing is, they might
I
be
think
willing to, but they have to kind of like lower the standard of what they're teaching in order to get people to understand. You said, right? It's a different game. It requires a lot of education for those rich people to get where they are. So we have to start by kind of having that education and maybe focusing on some sort of specific education for them, right? Because when you get to a certain age, you definitely need some financial help, right? You need something to teach you about how to do things with your money. So
Yeah.
that's like, I guess, something that's not like we try and get education for everybody, right? But there's different levels of education that different kind of classes need, right? Like people in poverty, they definitely need things, right? Like, but what would they prefer? Would they prefer like trying to learn a lot, or would they trying to prefer skills, like quick skills that you can work with your hands, and also money, things with money, right? Like how to
Right. So
handle your money.
you're wondering. So I guess that question is: would someone who's poor want like want the opportunity to be really rich, or would they want a situation where they can learn a trade and then
You're asking a completely like wrong question.
No.
You're asking, would you want to be rich or would you want to learn something?
Like,
there's
I'm
a
saying-
sacrifice you're making. I
Yeah,
think
I'm
you're not
saying
phrasing
like
that correctly.
we have this American dream thing, right? But it's misleading in a way because people think, okay, I can get to that rich level from that small standard, or they just don't even think about it at all. And that's how people bypass education. Instead, formulate some sort of education where they can use skills that are useful to them. They can have skills that are useful to them, get a job from it, and then give them financial tips from there so that they can start building up. Because once they get those tips, once they can finally get that job and how to financially secure their lives in a way, that's how you start building up the poor.
yeah. So any other thoughts? The next question is kind of what I'm like an interesting question. I think Sujeev has some answers too, but
Definitely excited to see what he has to say.
Which one?
Bro.
anyway, so I guess the next thing I was wondering is so there's a lot of like very free low cost ways to get education these days, right? So specifically like Google's engineering, what is it called? The boot camp. They're doing like the degreeless boot camp, right? And then there's like programming boot camps, right? We all know about that. And community college as well.
Sam.
Right. So one thing I'm wondering is this like, are these working? Are these systems working, right? Like who gets access to these systems? Do they work? And why are there still so many poor people who don't even have access to these things, right?
Okay.
I think they definitely work for maybe not exactly for who they're targeted to, but they definitely work for a lot of people. Like
I mean, community college has been working for.
But also, like when we talk about this, I think I can relate this back to my last point. They do work for some people, right? Like that's not the problem. But guess what? This is too big of a stretch, right? When you're talking about programming boot camps, you talk about Google's boot camp, and you talk about community college. That's like education up here. But people need to get this education and this education in order to actually like try and get to that level, right?
They have to have like general knowledge to begin with.
I think we may be misunderstanding exactly what living like poor in America is like. Like I don't think it's just like there's very different levels to it that are all categorized the same. You know, I think there's some people that would like not want to waste any time of their day, you know, not working and trying to get money.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Some
Like,
people
I think
have
that's the main
time
thing.
and have access to devices that are still not.
Rajiv, what I'm saying is like it's not attractive because it's too far of a goal to reach. That's why they aren't looking.
Right. So it's like okay, if
Yeah,
I give
I
up
understand
6
that.
months to do a boot camp, like how am I going to survive for those 6 months?
Yeah,
I
that's what
understand,
I'm
but I
thinking.
don't think everyone's in that situation. I don't think everyone categorized it in the percentage of or the number of children poverty graphs that would look like, or all. In that
Sure, but
situation.
like okay, like even like even if you're like you have a family, right, and your wife works, you still might not have 6 months to be like, okay, guys, we're gonna go 6 months, and I'm gonna try to learn this boot camp, and it's like, would someone take that risk of be like, okay, this boot camp is hard? Would I risk like my family for
No
6
chance.
months?
No chance.
Right? Because what if you just don't get it? What if you just can't code? What if it's
Yeah.
not for you?
like
Like-
how can you code without having any prior like maybe
Sure.
maybe you're going through the education system well, but like it's a huge jump, right? Like these boot camps aren't they're set in stone so that people who have some prior knowledge but don't want to go through the full course of a 4-year college kind of thing can get into it. And I don't think that that's the right setting for
Right.
like the majority of poor people.
Well, like one thing you'll hear is that a lot of like so, and I guess this kind of goes into like the next few questions, but like you'll hear people who are like proponents of like automation. They're like, oh, like yeah, we're replacing low skill jobs, but there's going to be high skill jobs now, right? And there's going to be even more jobs made, which means it's good for society, right? But like, you can't turn a cashier into like a guy who's building like robots. Like that doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like automation opens in. It's hard. It opens new doors.
Yeah, of course it's hard.
Right, but it's just unreasonable to expect like people who are doing automation level jobs, right? Jobs that can be automated to learn how to eventually like contribute to building those automations.
Are we talking about automation now?
Sure, we can if you want.
Okay, quickly on that, I think that I agree with that. I agree that the fact that like it's hard for people to go up and advance if they get like automated out of their own jobs. But like there also could be like an upward gentrification where like people level up, like the people at top get higher jobs, and then it slowly evolves to that point where the step between a cashier and like a technician isn't that much.
I see, yeah. But yeah, we can skip 6 if you guys want and move it later. But actually, I like 6. One thing I'm wondering is education the best way to like actually help poor people, right? Like, so like one thing I've noticed is that, or what I read about is like programs like affirmative action, right? It looks like they're helping, but there's a lot of evidence saying that it doesn't really work, right? So like
See why not?
I think we've like society has jumped to the conclusion that education is the future. Teaching people is going to be the way to get out of poverty, right? But do you guys buy that? I mean, I think I buy it, but like,
I personally do.
should we be skeptical about it? Like, because
No,
like,
because, I
is it
mean,
working at a high enough rate? Other solutions, and obviously, I don't think we know the solution. But do you think there might be other solutions?
nothing.
Yeah, going back to what I thought about, I think there needs to be some sort of specialized education, but I mean, I think that education is definitely, one of the best ways, especially if like we've seen athletes, we see the outliers, right? But specifically when you want to do something well in a certain field, education is the best way to go through it. But I think that education has to reach people, especially people in poverty, right? Who have a lot of other things on their minds, like alongside education, to make them see the benefit of it. And so you have to kind of put some form of specialized education so
Right,
that it helps them out.
I agree that I just think like currently, right, like general high school is not helpful to like for us, we think that high school of course is good. Like we need to know calculus, right? We need to know physics for our future jobs, right? But I think like people on TikTok are always like, oh, school is worthless. They teach us shit that we don't need to know. Like who still uses y equals mx plus b? And like when we hear that, we're like, bro, like what kind of shit is that? Like stop being an idiot, right? But it's just like in reality, it's for most people it's true because most people aren't going to be like mathematicians or people who need to know y equals mx plus b. There'll be people who they'll do jobs that require things that they are not learning in school. They don't even learn in college, and they learn like like if someone wants to be like in like let's say like I don't know if like wood shopping is still a job, right? But like
construction,
sure,
contract
like they
work.
contract, like they don't need to know any of this stuff, right? Like even so I do think that like general education is not good, and I think like trade schools and skill schools, right, work, like specialization work. But yeah, that's my opinion. So I still think that education is probably the answer, but I think this general idea of like, oh, let's teach everyone geometry, let's teach everyone US history, right? It's just that like I think the reason they do it is it's just like you can't expect like a 14-year-old kid to be like, all right, let me choose my career path and choose specialized like stuff that'll put me in that way, right? But and I'm like, I guess I'm tracking far, but like maybe high school is good in the sense that it teaches you like learning history at least makes you like a more knowledgeable person about the world in general, right? And maybe once you're 18 you don't go to college and you go to a trade school because now you have enough general knowledge about the world to like, and you've learned enough about how to properly learn, then now when you go to a trade school you'll succeed there. One thing I noticed is that some schools around here, like they have like when you enter high school they make you choose like a track, right? They make you choose like the CS track, or they make you choose like the business tracks, right? So at 13 14 years old you're basically choosing classes that'll specifically like decide what major you are, right? And I don't know if that's reasonable to like expect of like a 14-year-old kid, but
I think the entire idea, the reason general high school education is not even bad is like, first of all, you need exposure to what's out there, and at the same time, because you're young, you need to be constantly challenging yourself and developing your brain and stuff, right? Like you need to spend a good amount of hours in the day doing hard work, learning things, because that, I mean, your teen years is the most important.
Right, exactly, yeah. Like high school teaches you.
Like, I don't think it specifically matters what it is because you're not going to know what exactly you want to know. So it's good that they give us a variety of things. I think it's kind of stupid that some subjects are not involved, like business stuff.
And you're talking about like you were talking about how we're never going to use y equals mx plus b. I don't think memorizing that equation is the main point. I think the fact that like a class like math or something like that will teach you just how to think, how to form logical conclusions.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. But like the argument that a lot of people would make is that like, sure. I was gonna say the argument that a lot of people would make is like, okay, here, if I want to be like a construction person, right?
Yeah. Like, I think we understand the argument.
Right. Like, why can't I take a class that teaches me about construction and also in the same way learn hard work in that class?
Okay. But like, isn't that the point of college? So at what school do you want to start saying, okay, now you can choose what you want to do?
Right, but I think a lot of people
like to middle school, people start complaining. You want to be elementary school?
Right, but I think even college kids complain like, "Yo, I'm not learning."
They don't even know what they're doing. They don't. People just don't know what they want to do. That's what happens.
Yeah.
And then they get in debt, and then they just have to choose a job. It's such a common thing to happen. People go finish college, get their degree, and have no idea what they want to do.
But just bringing this argument back to the whole idea of homeless people, the best way to give them just I don't think when people say education they mean the kind of stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, we're not talking about. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone was.
No, but even like for the youth, right? For the youth, it's always about like, okay, let's make sure our kids go to school. Let's make sure our kids stay in school, and let's make sure our kids go to college, right? But then at that, like, are they doing the right things in college? Are they studying the right things? Or like if they get like a freaking psychology major, right? Like what are they gonna do with a psychology job, right?
Psychology is actually underrated. There's a lot of stuff.
Sure, but like
psychology is job.
A lot of people like Trevor Lawrence is psychology, right? Like, come on now. Like I think
perspective of a
No.
very tech.
No,
no,
but-
I'm just no. Objectively, psychology is what I think it's one of the majors that it's like most regretted, and it's most like least practical. Like some statistics. So maybe psychology, maybe communication. Is one of the two.
I don't understand why people like.
I don't know
like,
about psychology.
I don't know why
Psychology,
people choose psychology over neuroscience. It's literally like right next to each
yeah,
other.
I mean,
Like, why would
psychology
you-
is
Wait,
just
maybe
a
psychology is
different
the
version of
wrong-
neuroscience.
I
I
think
you might want to pick something
to
up.
answer that question,
more
Aditya, you would
was
need to understand why
contentious.
people go to college.
Well, what did you say?
I think to understand the answer to that question, you need to first understand why people go to college in the first place.
Psychology, why people go to college in the first place?
I mean, people go to college because most people go to college because it's just like a social standard.
It's a social
It is-
standard.
it is
That's
social
the
standard.
only truth of it.
Right. I mean, it's like it's just a standard that like okay, now you have to go to college. But I think that standard is it's fair because employers are just not going to hire you. If you like we talked about this in our free college episode, right? Oh, that was a long time ago. But
I
like
think more and more will. I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 10 years.
yeah,
About
One thing that I want to maybe brush on is, do you guys think like we talked, right? We talked about our prototypical high school and we said, okay, like this education path is the best way. And I understand, right? In high school, you want to explore, you want to learn more and you want to challenge yourself. But do you think that that's focusing too much on a long-term solution when people
Right.
need more of a short-term solution? And do you think that that's a problem? That maybe that's decentivizing people because people look more at the short term when you have a problem in front of you rather than at the long term?
right, exactly. I think that's true because it's like okay, when we did our 1920 skit, right? We didn't do it. Varj, you three did it, right? But it's like, the parents aren't noticing, or back in the day, right? They're like, okay, yo, we have a harvest to do. Like, I don't give a shit about your book, right? Like, sure, maybe 10 years down the line you'll get like an accounting job, but like we got like freaking we got a harvest to collect, right? So, yeah, I think a lot of people get frustrated by that. Like a lot of people who are just kind of in school because they're there, they have to be there, and they don't really understand, right? They get frustrated that, yo, what is this education like bullshit, right? Like they're teaching me this useless shit that I'm not gonna use. Like I don't even know what I want to do. I don't really care. And they get frustrated. They don't understand, right? They don't understand that this is a long-term process, and they're like, yo, I have problems now that I need to do now. I need to go work at Starbucks and make money because my mom can't keep the lights on and stuff like that, right? So I think people get frustrated by the long-term process of education. And that's kind of why I asked the question, is education the best way to do it? Do we focus on the long term of producing our youth, right? And obviously that's going to have long-term benefits for our standard of living as a society. But in the short term, these people don't have an incentive to stay in school. They don't have an incentive to go, they don't have an incentive to want to go to school when they have more problems in their lives right now that they have to deal with, right? Like you guys kind of portrayed that in that one video, right? The poor versus poor video. And it's true, like we did it as a joke, but it's definitely true that like people have their own problems they want to solve now. And that's why I think if you ask a lot of poor people, like, what would you want as your solution, right? They wouldn't say education. They'd probably be like, I want a way for me to, and if they said anything about education, they'd be like, I want a way to learn a specific job that can make me a lot of money, as opposed to like, I want general exploration of different career paths and then choose from there. So I think when you're poor, a lot more stuff is immediate.
And I can confirm that I have a lot of friends in the San Bernardino
Mhm.
area who that if you know anything about the area, it's extremely poor, filled
Mhm.
with gangs, that kind of thing. Just anything that requires like an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Those people from there, they're like, okay, we know this will be good, but to be honest, we just don't care because it's not the point. Like personally, I was trying to them about medical research in the beginning. They're like, okay, we know medical research is good, but like to be honest, no one really cares. No one hears anything out of it because just straight up, it takes too long. We have more pressing things to deal with. And then our conversation shifted to more of just like what Ian was talking about education, that kind of thing. But I'm just saying that affects every facet of their being.
Yeah. I think that's kind of just the reality situation. I guess the next thing, and now we'll kind of conclude the next two questions with like automation specifically. So, I think Sajid proposed this question, but like, is automation actually like a good thing, right? Like, in the long run, automation is going to boom the economy, right? It's like the next big wave, but and in that way, it's going to increase the standard of living for society, but it comes at the cost of putting people through temporary periods of struggle, right? And maybe it increases the gap between the rich and the poor. But if the overall standard of living increases, is it a good thing, right? So do we think that jobs being automated and the economy becoming more efficient is actually a good thing for, let's say, society first and then the poor second, right? Or should we kind of fight automation? Should we keep the status quo and should we allow people to have jobs where they can do right? Being a cashier is not a high skilled job. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you guys, I kind of rambled there. Any thoughts?
Well, I just in general I don't really believe in like restricting technology that much, especially when it's going to make a positive impact in the economy. And it's and in the case that like eventually we're gonna have to advance, right? Eventually
Right.
we're gonna have to like become a more efficient society. It also, the United States can't compete with any other nation. Like it won't be able to compete like in the global scale. Like eventually you're gonna have to do something to separate yourself, and it's better to do that right now. And it's better to like plan out what the steps are you're gonna take and how you're gonna have like lower skilled job workers like cashiers just upgrade to a technician and make that step up instead of going. You don't have to worry about going all the way up to like the high skill jobs, but just worry about how you're gonna take the steps to at least advance these workers to a little bit higher skill job, basically.
And also, I think one thing, like, I know automation, right? It sounds good and bad in the case that, like, of course, it's going to improve the economy, like that they said, but it's bad in that um, it's going to take away jobs. But we have to also be realistic, like Aditya said. It's important to like, even if we wanted, like, I know the moral thing is to want to have these jobs, right, for cashiers and all. But realistically, that's not the case because companies' main goal it's to make money for their own company
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And of course, if they have a situation where they can make a good amount of money by installing some sort of thing and kind of progressing toward the future and being seen as this new commodity, because guess what, you have new technology, of course they're going to do it. So that's why I think it's less realistic, even if we want it. Like, that's the moral thing. Everyone's going to say, oh, if we could do this, but it's not the direction that our country is going to take.
Just a
Yeah.
bit of a tangent. Did you guys ever watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the old movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
Y'all
not.
remember the dad? He started off. He was the guy who put the toothpaste cover caps on the toothpaste things. Then he lost his job because automation machine replaced him. Then at the end of the movie, when Charlie got rich, he went back and he was a technician for the guy fixing the machine. He fixed the machine that replaced him. Anyway, I like that parallel.
Okay.
But yeah, my thoughts are I do think you need to
Damn,
slow
I just
it.
got ignored, bro.
No, why? We said nice. Yeah.
Are you okay?
Anyways, I'm thinking that like I do think it needs to be slowed, right? I don't think we can just let like the people who create these automations instantly replace, right? Like I do think there needs to be a slowed process, right? You need to like allow people to adapt, right? Because if you don't allow people to adapt, it's just gonna like screw everything over because now people don't have money to spend, people are screwing. Like we can get into the economics behind it, right? This is a whole debate, but I think that like automation, we can't just let it like go at the speed that it is going because then people don't have the time to reskill. People don't have the time to adapt, and it's really about like adaptation in society. So I think it needs to be slowed. I do think it's a good thing in the sense that obviously you're going to increase the standard of living in the long run, but in order to protect people in the short run, you need to slow it down. I guess GB, you have any thoughts on this since this is kind of your question?
I mean, I think it's very interesting that we have to like. Okay, we all like technology's good and stuff, but I think there comes a point where it's like we created something, and do we want to let it destroy us? So I think there comes a point where it's like a lot of um, stuff we're developing is like not necessarily to make like the world a better place. A lot of technology we're developing is not to increase the like human efficiency or capacity. We're just building things that will replace manufacturing jobs that maybe people need. Like we're just replacing jobs that it doesn't make sense all the time for like robots can't do everything faster, right? And that's like a situation that I can relate to. So like there's not always a point where like a robot will be completely more efficient, right? You can automate a task and it'll be completely more efficient than a human, or to a case where it necessarily needs to be more efficient than a human. At that point, you're just like making something to replace you just because you want to. So you're automating tasks that you don't need to, and so I think like we shouldn't just because we have to. We should definitely slow technology.
Right.
Sometimes.
I agree with that one.
I think this automation is one thing that it's good for the government to control that transition, or like have some input in it, because corporations will not be unbiased, and you need to have someone controlling it.
All right. So I think the last thing that I want to kind of go over to conclude, right, is so with automation looking like it's gonna like displace a bunch of people, right? Obviously maybe we don't have the answers, but like what can they do next, right? Like, okay, let's say you get displaced. Like what is your next move, right? How do you survive in the short term? How do you set yourself up for long-term success? Do you keep seeking temporary like, and this is a big like predicament that a lot of people have to go through, right? People are getting replaced by cashiers, and this is especially happening because of COVID, right? Do you keep looking for temporary jobs, or do you suck it up and take a risk and put it all on the line and do a coding boot camp and learn how to code? Or do you find a new long-term employment situation? And this is like a question that a lot of people are like grappling with, right? Because like we don't know how to respond to this, right? So we don't know what the best way is to do it. So like, what do you guys think on this?
I mean, it's the same thing before. There's always going to be new jobs created. They're just going to be higher. They're going to require higher skill, more knowledge. So it goes back to the training stuff, job training stuff.
So would you try to like you just got okay? Let's say you're at Walmart, right? You're a cashier and you just got replaced. Like, do you?
I think
like,
during the transition period, like with like I assume it's going to be like next 20 years. Like there should just be you're unemployed, but you should get paid to be trained.
So Walmart should like invest in you as a cashier and be like, okay, I'm going to train you to now repair my automated cashier.
I mean, no, I don't think that's necessarily how it should work. I think maybe like I don't know the logistics of it, but I think there should be some sort of like government-based programs where it's like if you just got replaced, we will pay you in the meantime while you find another job. It's a longer, more sustainable job. So it's basically like an unemployment thing with a job training. So
does anyone know actually like how long these job training things? I remember when I was talking about the UBI debate.
I mean, they can be just like, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, you need basic training. Most people that are employed at a job learn on the job as well.
Yeah. I think
so. You need basic training, and then you go to the job and learn on the job.
Yeah, I remember what I was gonna say. I remember Siva said some like BS to some kid and said like, no, training is 6 months. You'll be back in a job in 6 months. And like, I don't know if I buy that.
I don't know how these programs exactly work.
No, but I think a lot of people do like 2 weeks of training and then they start working, and then they do a lot more training on the job.
Yeah, no, I see it on probation basis. Your first like 6 months are like, okay, do a good job and we'll keep.
Okay. I was gonna say before we conclude, like I think if I got displaced and I was a freaking Walmart cashier, I don't know like what the hell I'd do. I'd just be flustered. Like honestly, like I'd be hella nervous because I don't think I could like I don't think I would be ready to just like switch careers, right? Like and be like, all right, let's go back to education, the thing that failed me and the thing that I was not interested in, right? And be like, okay. And who's even teaching me the reality of this, right? Who is teaching the people who are getting replaced by Walmart like that? No, there's more jobs being created. It's just in the long run, like you have to get higher skill. Who's even telling these people? How do these people know that? You know what I mean? That's kind of scary. It's like we know it, but how does a Walmart cashier know that? Like, okay, your next move is to become a technician.
We think we know it. There's a chance we don't.
Sure, you're right. You're right. Even we might. Yeah. So how is a Walmart cashier going to know that? Like, how is a Walmart cashier going to know that? Yo, I just got replaced. Time to go learn freaking Python, right? I don't know. That's just my example. But like, they'll just be like, shit, what the hell? Let's go find another cashier job. Target hasn't replaced me yet. Target hired me, right? I think that's what I would do in all seriousness, right? And then you just be bouncing around for 5 years, and damn, now you're screwed because some other guy learned Python. Now he's set. He's got a data science job at Google.
It's tough.
Like shit. Like it's just you're screwed. It's just no. Again, this comes down to like no one's teaching people financial literacy, and no one's teaching people these kinds of things.
Most
Well,
of
yeah, I mean,
like let's say you're like a Walmart cashier, right? Like most of the time, just that barely minimum wage is not enough to supplement a job income. So usually you have at least, not at least, but like 2 jobs, right?
Mhm.
So let's say you lose both of them, right? And you get a job with the exact same money as your old job, like a technician or something, right? How are you supplementing your extra income? How do you know you're going to keep making that money when you don't have any job anymore because everything is gone? You feel me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, but also like you Nate said.
Yeah, Mike?
Dude, stop being nice. Wait, so anyway, Nate said like no one's telling people how to teach. No one's teaching people financial literacy. No one's telling people to take these courses. But like,
Yeah.
I don't want to blame them. I don't blame them for not taking
Exactly.
courses.
No, exactly. I know because I'm telling you right now, if I got replaced by Walmart, I'm looking at Target who didn't replace the cashiers yet, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly, because
And even if someone told me, you should do this course, even if someone
Right.
educated me and do that,
How-
I'm not doing that shit.
right, how do I have the discipline to understand the vision of like, shit, I just got replaced. This is gonna happen 5 more times in the next 3 years. I need to go learn a new skill. Who is telling me that? All I know is that this light bill is is I still got to pay for the lights at home. Let me go. I got.
And you want me to turn to the job that does
Okay.
Yeah, he said light bill.
He did. I don't know what
I
he was
know.
saying.
It's electricity.
I could do it.
Anyways, and then these guys will think like, and you want me to turn to a job where this nerdy guys in high school were sitting in like a library doing? You think I can do that? Hell no, they can't.
Yeah, it's just like it's
just like too much. It's like you can't persuade someone that's gonna save them.
I think that's the scariest part. Like because like what people hear on the news, right? Like if I just got fired, I'm gonna turn on the news. I'm like, yo, what's going on? And the headline is Walmart fires cashiers in exchange for automated cashier system. I'm like, okay, cool. What the hell is Target doing that? Like, no, seriously, because the news isn't telling me workers must seek new employment opportunities in computer science and in marketing and in advertising.
Decently informative. I just
no, but even if the news did say that, I'd be like,
I'd be like, dude,
bullshit.
okay, yeah. Like, I'm not gonna buy that. How am I as a cashier gonna realize that I need to learn advertising? I need to learn marketing. I need to learn this and that. Like, how am I realizing that? Who's teaching me that? Right?
No, but even if you did buy that, maybe this will help me. Like, I'm not gonna throw my life on.
Right, exactly. And even if I knew it's true, how can I take that risk of spending the time to do it when I have things to pay for, the light bill,
I have
the water bill?
I have a freaking kid to take care of.
Yeah, bro. Like it's tough, right? Like you don't know what to do. So I think it's just a very tough situation that there's nothing. There's things we can do about it. We don't know because we're not politicians. We're not legislation people. We're
certainly not that guy.
Economists. We are not that guy. But that's what Walmart tells to the cashiers. You're not that guy. Thanks, guys, for watching this episode. I know no one's watching this episode, but thanks for tuning into this episode of the Holly Ackwood Podcast, episode 6, season 3. We had a great discussion.